Live from the slightly twisted deck bar, it's the POOJIE Podcast with Justin Lemie.
The POOJIE Podcast is proudly sponsored by Cimarron Golf Club, located in Jacksonville, Florida, off County Road 210, just west of St. John's Parkway.
What is up, everybody? As always, thank you to Cimarron Golf Club. Was just there this past weekend and enjoyed some time there up at the clubhouse. They do great stuff over there, so of course, thank you to them. But I'm sitting here, and I'm just excited to be back. This episode is now being released on Monday, July 20th, and we had a great weekend in sports. This is the first episode I've released since June, actually beginning of July. I think July 1st was my last episode I released. Did the POOJIE Podcast playback, which thank you to all the support in that. An opportunity for all the new subscribers and listeners to be able to go back and listen to some of the original episodes. It was really fun posting those myself, even going back, and just kind of seeing how far the podcast has come and where we are today, right? And where we are today is sports is very close to making its comeback. And quickly and briefly, as best as I can, sports is coming back. What does that mean? You know, sports means so much to so many people. And to me, sports is a way to kind of lose a little bit of focus every now and then and enjoy something to take maybe some thoughts and stress away from other things that occur in life, right? And that's the cliche answer. Oh, why do people like sports? It's an outlet to get away from the real world. But realistically, that's what we need right now. Obviously, the past 4 or 5 months have been absolutely insane. And soccer's made its comeback. MLS has been back for about 2 weeks now. Orlando City Soccer opened up against Inter Miami about 2 weeks ago. We got baseball coming back this Friday. We have hockey and basketball coming back next week. So I'm excited. I'm excited because this is a sports podcast at its core, and it has been 4 long months without sports. And this whole thing started without sports as a means to bring sports interviews and content in a time where we were all missing sports. And here I am sitting at the slightly twisted deck bar, obviously where I record all of my interviews, but it's missed sports. We've missed having sports on the TV here and watching the 4th round of the PGA Tour and Sunday NASCAR races and baseball games and so much more. Hockey, you know, the playoffs were supposed to be in June, NBA in June. We've missed a lot, but I'm excited for it to come back to bring you more live sports content and interviews. And that starts today on July 20th with our Soccer is Back. Not only recap of what the EPL has done as well as La Liga and Bundesliga, but also the MLS is back and kind of previewing what to expect from that. So I'm excited. I got 2 great guests lined up for you, former collegiate soccer player, also a current employee of the Orlando City Soccer Club. So excited for both of them to join for you guys to listen to some of that. That'll be exciting. But I'm excited to be able to open FanDuel and not have to bet on NBA 2K simulations or NFL Madden simulations or go on Twitch and watch a simulated NCAA football game. I'm excited to finally be able to turn on and have an option and have some choices of what sports I want to watch. In fact, yesterday started out with some EPL soccer, flipped between that and the F1. That led me right into golf, which led me right into NASCAR. So it was a packed Sunday, and it felt like a normal Sunday. And I think that's what we all want to feel again. Obviously, it's been great getting outside, doing things socially distant, getting practice in the golf game as well, of course. But here we are with sports coming back, and I'm extremely excited to continue bringing you coverage and content over the next week. So today we start with MLS is back, or soccer is back, excuse me. Then Wednesday we have MLB is back. Next Monday, the 27th, we'll have NBA is back, followed by Wednesday, the 29th, with hockey is back. So a lot to get into, a lot to unwrap, but a lot to be excited about as well. So continue to enjoy this content. Enjoy this interview presented by Strings Sports Brewery. And stick around for PoojieParlay presented by Shores Pub Mandarin following the interview. A lot to recap from this past weekend in sports with EPL, and NASCAR, PGA Tour golf, and so on. So stick around. Thanks for supporting. Thanks for being patient while I got new interviews uploaded and ready to roll. So enjoy and stick around. Thanks. Thank you to Strings Sports Brewery for supporting the podcast, bringing you all these episodes. A great spot right there in North Jacks, just north of downtown in the Springfield Historic District on Main Street. And also thank you to Cimarron Golf Club. They always do a great job there as well. A great sponsor. My first sponsor, actually, so exciting to always give them a plug as well. But I do want to welcome on this next guest, obviously doing a back to sports segment throughout the next 2 weeks, with this one being the first episode. Soccer has been back for the longest of any of the sports, even before NASCAR and PGA Tour Golf came back. Soccer overseas made their return a few months ago, actually. Not too many people knew that, but they have been playing for quite some time. And I do have a guest here, a former collegiate soccer player, a soccer fanatic, was born overseas in Scotland, so he's very well versed in not only the EPL, but Bundesliga, La Liga, and what all of those soccer leagues do and what their systems are. So Noel Blaha, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here, Justin. Thanks so much.
Big victory this morning for your Southampton Saints.
Yeah, and it was they've been playing well lately. In the match against Bournemouth fighting to stay up in the Premier League. So it was an important match for them. So it meant something towards the end of the season for Bournemouth, and added an extra element of excitement to that match.
And I'm very glad you just mentioned that. And we'll kick off the show this way. You talk about relegation, you talk about fighting for points towards the end of the year or end of the season, where in many American sports, these games wouldn't matter for teams towards the bottom of the standings. What is it about the EPL and those other leagues overseas? How have they found a way to still make these games matter, whether it's Champions League, whether it's Europa, and so on?
Well, it's an interesting point, Justin. There's a lot of things going on, and I think the best way to inform maybe an American sports fan that doesn't quite comprehend the Champions League, Europa League, FA Cup, League Cup, and all that stuff that's sort of going on while the regular season is going on, the best way that I can explain it to folks is college basketball. Think about a college basketball team. So your team may play, let's say, in the SEC. So they're playing their SEC schedule. Well, those regular season, and they're fighting to finish in first place in the league. So the EPL teams are fighting to finish in first place in the EPL. While that competition is going on, there's also a cup competition going on. So think about if the NCAA March Madness tournament was happening while your regular basketball season was happening. So these teams are competing to finish in first place in their league to win a league trophy and a league championship, while at the same time competing for cup competitions. And some of those are domestic cups, like a League Cup or an FA Cup. And if they've qualified by finishing in their leagues the previous season, they're playing for continental cups, like a European Cup, UEFA Cup, Champions League, and things like that. So that stuff is all going on all at the same time. So that's the best way I can explain it, is you're playing a regular season schedule, but you're also in another competition at the same time. And that's why there's no playoffs necessarily for a league championship, because that league championship is determined on where the standings are. And those cup competitions are happening at the same time. So you've got that all going on, and you're wanting to stay in your league by not getting relegated, which again creates another level of excitement. So you could be in your league in the bottom half and maybe be fearful of being relegated, but you're still playing for a cup championship potentially as well. And that happens sometimes too. So there's a lot of extra added elements that keeps things exciting for these teams and these leagues across Europe.
And in Liverpool, actually, so they've already clinched the EPL title. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they were the fastest team to ever do that. I think they're ahead by upwards of 20 points, which a win is 3 points, a tie is 1 point, and a loss is 0 points. So impossible for anyone to catch them at this point. The battle between second and fifth is obviously a close one in the EPL right now. I think Wolverhampton is in sixth, but between second and fifth right now, is it the top four that make it into the Champions League?
That's correct. Yeah, I believe that's correct. And, talk about Liverpool, the English Premier League top to bottom, and we've seen on this restart, the parity is incredible. So, like, those teams in the top 4 or 5 positions could lose to some of the teams in the bottom 6 or 7 positions day in and day out. So for Liverpool to win the league by so many points, as you mentioned, Justin, they had a far and away one of the most dominant seasons we've ever seen since the Premier League kind of formed in the 90s. So yeah, they are still fighting for those top spots to qualify for the Champions League. And then below that, there's the Europa League, which is kind of the second tier European competition.
And so here in the American sports, obviously, like you mentioned, we're used to a playoff system, whereas the points here, like in hockey per se, are more so used for a seeding process into the playoffs. So MLS soccer obviously has made its comeback over the last week and a half. Do you think the point system that the EPL used would benefit something like the MLS, or doing a relegation system here in America? Would that kind of draw more eyes or more interest?
I think so, yes. But the owners of those MLS teams would say no, because they bought a franchise and they want to keep that franchise in this league that they've created. And the bottom line, it comes down to, what does U.S. Soccer Federation want to do with their domestic league? And if you look across the world, I think it's been proven that promotion and relegation on your domestic professional league helps your national team performance in international competitions. And so I think my argument for promotion and relegation in the U.S. is not only to make that more exciting for people to see, end of season matches mean something, but it's also to strengthen the United States national team, which I think has for decades been far underperforming based on our population base, as well as the skilled players that are out there that are maybe untapped because of some things, and one of which I think is not having a promotion relegation system on a domestic league. But the flip on that is those billionaire owners that started the MLS put a lot of skin in the game in the mid-90s to start the MLS, and they've made an investment into that. And so when you look at that, those guys are all kind of got together and they operate that league. And the difference in those European domestic leagues is that those clubs are all individual, and the league manages them, but the league doesn't have an ownership investment or things to look out for in that way. So it's almost a difference between conglomerate of companies, which is kind of what we have in the MLS, and individual companies battling it out in the European side. So to make this short answer go longer, I would be for a promotion and relegation. I think it would be really hard to pull off in the United States.
And I know something that you had mentioned to me just in our individual conversations is there's a lack of investment towards the team talent at the MLS level, which is almost kind of keeping the league from growing into a more powerful league, just simply based on there's no penalty for finishing last, correct?
Yeah, that's right. The league has come leaps and bounds since it started in the mid 90s. But in order to be, up another level, there's got to be some sort of incentive for those teams not to finish last. And the last few years, they've done a lot better with bringing in higher quality talent and developing some of that local grown talent as well. But you're right, on the face of it, as the thing plays out, if you're a last place team, there's not as much motivation because if you finish in last place, you're still in the same league the next season.
Gotcha. No, and I definitely appreciate that. The next guest that I have coming on directly after this, he actually works for Orlando City. He's going to explain a little bit about how the MLS is trying to shed that persona of being a developmental league and a retirement league and kind of capturing some of that talent. And like you mentioned, developing the national team as well, because we all know from Olympics to World Cups and so on, that the national team exposure can really build the overall team just from fans and kids watching it and saying, I want to be a part of this national team. So it'll be exciting. But Noel, I appreciate you being here. I don't want to take up any more of your time, but thanks for that input on the EPL and those foreign leagues and kind of what they do to differentiate themselves almost at a higher level than American soccer. Anything else from you as far as soccer goes or sports returning?
I think it's great. Obviously, the measures that the leagues overseas have taken have really paid off, and it seems to be working well. So hopefully that's a model that the American sports teams can look to follow as well, and hopefully we can slowly, gradually get our sports back to where they are so they can fill that void in our lives.
For sure. No, I definitely agree with that, and thanks again for joining. Best of luck to Southampton with their few remaining games, and I'll have to keep an eye out for what competitions they're in and what cups they may potentially be battling for, so I appreciate it.
Thanks, Justin.
All righty. Thank you. All righty. And thank you to Noel for jumping on the podcast and talking English Premier League, Bundesliga, some of those other leagues overseas that made their comeback about a month ago into the soccer world. Exciting to see that, and honestly helped me get into the sport a little bit more. I've been watching more soccer as much as I can, at least, especially on Saturdays. I love waking up with soccer just before golf, and then the same on Sunday just before NASCAR. But I do have a buddy of mine here, actually the very first guest ever on the POOJIE podcast. What kind of started this beast, to be honest, or once I started it, I was just going to run with it, and this is what it's become. But I do have Kyle Vrban here back to talk some soccer. Obviously, as you know from episode 1, Kyle works for Orlando City Soccer, and the MLS, American-born soccer, has made its comeback. So I do want to ask him some questions about that. But first, Kyle, I want to ask you, banking off of Noel's segment about overseas soccer, in your opinion, what's the biggest difference between EPL, Bundesliga, and American soccer, and maybe some of the differences, similarities that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of differences between the leagues, and they all kind of have their own merits to them. The main differences are kind of just style of play. Like the Spanish style is going to be a little bit more intricate on the passing and just a different style of that. EPL is kind of known for being a little bit more direct. I'd say if you're a neutral fan that's not really into soccer, EPL is definitely the best way to go. That's something that you could just turn on the TV, and no matter what teams are playing, really, especially if it's a team in the top 6 or 7. It's going to be an exciting game to watch, regardless of what sports you're looking at there, and it's actually getting pretty tight. I know that the Champions League spots are obviously the most important. Top 4 in the Premier League end up finishing in the Champions League, so that's a huge thing for revenue for the clubs and just bringing in top talent acquisition wise. So Manchester United, I know that's the team I support. They're struggling right around 5th place right now, only like a point behind Leicester and Chelsea. So these games are really going to matter, especially towards the end of the season. For most teams, that's usually time to kind of call it quits if you're not going to win the title. But there's still a lot to fight for. So, every game is really making a difference. So it's been fun to watch it, but definitely a huge difference, coming towards the MLS. I think it's just, it's not like the MLS is worse per se. I just think you're going to have the top talent from around the world that's going to be attracted to the Premier League. So just naturally, the MLS is going to have to catch up because we haven't been around as long. But, it is time finally that we're attracting that talent from South America, from Europe. And there's guys that want to play here, and there's guys that want to make a name, because the difference is, a top talent coming, 18 years old, coming out of Brazil might not start right away on a team, like Manchester City or United. But if they come to Orlando City, they could have their shot and make a name for themselves and become a club legend here. It's a completely different style.
Yeah, and I know the MLS is definitely trying to separate themselves from being a developmental league or even a retirement league. We've seen, obviously, in Orlando City, guys like Kaká. With
Yep.
Orlando City, we've seen Zlatan, out in LA play. But we've also seen those young up-and-coming guys, like you mentioned, Giovinco going to Juventus in the Italian league. I even recently was watching a game, saw DeAndre Yedlin playing overseas. I know Kyle Laren's playing elsewhere now. I know a lot of guys that I remember from my time working with Orlando City have since moved on. I don't want to say to bigger and better things, but maybe to another opportunity to advance their level. What's interesting to me is a guy like Christian Pulisic, right? He's an American guy. Talented player. He's over there in Chelsea, was on an absolute tear a little bit ago. He's got a little bit of a scoreless drought right now. But for a guy like him, how does the MLS have to take an approach to maybe keep a guy like him domestic and say, our league is just as good as that league, and you can do just as much with your career here as there?
Yeah, and that's the tough balance we got to find, because we want our young players, especially guys that are going to go on to lead the national team. We want them to be playing with the best. So I mean, that's the drawback is guys like DeAndre Yedlin playing in England, guys like Pulisic, and then Josh Sargent. All these guys that are playing in the Bundesliga, John Brooks. There's just so much talent over there to compete with. And Pulisic went very young. Obviously, he's from Hershey, Pennsylvania here, born and raised. So, we expected him to kind of play here. But once he got that call to Dortmund in Germany, that's just something you can't pass up, especially if you're a young soccer player. So he did really well through their developmental system. And Jurgen Klopp was the one that gave him the chance. And now he's the Premier League winner with Liverpool this year. So, obviously saw something in him, and he was actually trying to get him to come to Liverpool over Chelsea, but didn't end up working out. He ended up going to Chelsea, and now I think since the restart, I think there's been 7 games, and Pulisic has got 3 goals and 3 assists. So I mean, he's been on fire, and Frank Lampard's given him all the confidence to succeed, and he's really doing it on a national scale, and that's great for the U.S. and that's great for young players that are looking for inspiration.
And you mentioned that with the World Cup, and I remember our freshman year in college enjoying the World Cup over at your place in St. Augustine, and how exciting that was. And for someone that's not a huge soccer fan, to be able to get into a sport that much, it really shows just how much that country's flag can take the sport, get the fans behind them. Now, you mentioned some of this talent going overseas, but domestically, we've seen some teams pop up over the last few years. Obviously, Orlando City was a team that was around for a while, but they entered the MLS the same year as New York City FC, which New York City FC obviously competes with New York Red Bulls, who have been around for a while. But now you've recently had Cincinnati FC, who they're notorious for having a great fan base in Cincinnati. Minnesota now has a team, Atlanta United, and most recently Inter Miami. So with all of these new teams coming into the fold of MLS, is that just an owner trying to make a quick buck? Is that something that can be noted or a symbol of, okay, we're getting more talent here in America, we need more teams? With these teams popping up, what's the thoughts behind that?
I think it's a good sign for the MLS. It's just growth. More teams popping up, more people supporting and wanting to support their local, areas. There was a lot of parts of the country that didn't have their teams to support. And actually, I don't know if you've heard, there's going to be 2 or 3 more teams joining the MLS over the next couple of years. I know Nashville also just joined. And then they're going to have Austin FC and I think Sacramento and Charlotte. So it's ever expanding. I'm not sure if they're going to look to go beyond that, because it might have some issues with how they break up the conferences there. But yeah, I think it's a good thing just for the sport as a whole, just more competition and more excitement and new opponents to play. Because since we don't have a relegation system, it's always nice to have more teams and more variety coming to your stadium each year. So.
And I know when Orlando City entered the MLS, it was almost considered the soccer capital of the South is what Orlando was kind of coined. I don't know if people still refer to it as that, because now with Inter Miami and Atlanta United, now Charlotte, Nashville, like you mentioned, it's almost like Orlando City was that trailblazing team into the South, which is something that they can always hang on to. And I know Orlando City has a great fan base with the Iron Lion firm, if I'm not mistaken. There's another one. What's the other one?
The Ruckus, yeah.
The Ruckus, right? And those 2 groups, they support the team, like you mentioned. And when you watch the World Cup, when you watch foreign leagues, one thing to notice is the fan bases, how rowdy they get and how exciting it is. How is this MLS season kind of handling no fans? Is there a lack of excitement or a lack of energy that's affecting the games?
It's definitely taking a toll on the players, I'm sure. And I think, we definitely are keeping that soccer capital of the South alive now that, everyone's coming to Orlando to play these games for the tournament here. So, Orlando's still that hub. And thankfully, they haven't had too many issues. I know FC Dallas and Nashville had to drop out from positive cases, but thankfully they were able to take care of that before everyone kind of went into the bubble here and ended up spreading that. But I think it's definitely tough with all these new teams coming in and competing, and David Beckham creating that team to the South there. It's definitely going to be rough going forward. But, without the fans in the stands, it's just eerie watching the games. But it's definitely going to be nice once we can finally have fans back in there, because there's really no replacing when, especially for Exploria Stadium here in Orlando, when it's packed and it's loud, you just can't replace that atmosphere. So I know that every season ticket member I've talked to, they just can't wait to get back in there, obviously in a safe manner, but yeah, they're all excited to get back home.
And how devastating was it, for Inter Miami to open up their, long time schedule against Orlando City, but to play against Orlando City without fans, right? That's got to be devastating. I know a lot of people were looking forward to that. The last question I do want to ask you, I guess from an international standpoint, you talked about the national team. Obviously, I'm wearing a Colombia soccer jersey right now. I would say that is the men's national team I support. Now, in your opinion, I see the Croatian flag right there next to you. In your opinion, is it okay for someone, let's say like me, that doesn't really have an affiliation with soccer or a fandom of soccer to a deeper extent, to support another country's national team if they so choose to do so?
Of course. At the end of the day, it comes down to what you really want to put your support into. So, it's just like any other team, but with the national team, it's just a little different because, usually I would say have a reason behind it. Like the reason that I support Croatia, and they made that amazing run in the last World Cup to the final, something that, I could only hope to see. And unfortunately, my grandpa wasn't around here to see that, but he was originally from Croatia. So that's the reason why I support them. So, I'd say, if you've got a connection to any country that's not, where you're from, go for it. And when it comes down to it, you're going to know when those teams are playing, you're going to kind of lean one way or the other. And that's going to tell you kind of, where you want to support. If you watch a game, USA, Colombia, and you feel like you're supporting Colombia a lot more, then go for it. Just sell out. So, well, that's been the toughest thing for me. A lot of the guys at the office have been asking me. And when I tell you this has been a
hot topic. It hasn't just come up in passing once or at lunch once. It's been talked about a lot. And a guy that I work with about the Italian team, myself with the Colombian team. So it's been talked about quite a bit. They asked me that question, would you root Colombia or United States? And I plead the fifth because I really can't make that determination until I am watching the game, which I told them with the way things are looking for the U.S. national team, I'm not too sure the next time they're going to play in a competitive match against Colombia in like a World Cup setting. But no, I appreciate you being here. It's been great having you, and it's been a great soccer segment. This is the first Back to Sports episode we've released. So definitely great. So again, another first for you, right? Another first episode.
Happy to be here. Appreciate it. I'll come back as many times as you want me here.
For sure, man. Well, that sounds good. We'll keep in touch about soccer, and I appreciate you bringing in the expert level knowledge to the program. Thanks.
I do what I can. Thanks, man.
So thank you to Strings Sports Brewery for bringing us that interview, as well as to Noel and Kyle Vrban for joining the podcast to discuss soccer. Excited to have released this episode as the first episode for our Sports is Back segments. So looking forward to getting to baseball on Wednesday. But it is time for Poojie Parlay, presented by Shores Pub Mandarin. A very eventful weekend. An interesting golf tournament. I guess that's where we can start. John Rahm ended up winning at 9 under par, was assessed a 2-stroke penalty after a infraction on the 17th hole, was actually going to win by 5 strokes, ended up only winning by 3 strokes. Nonetheless, he won the tournament, but we actually hit on a Xander Schauffele top 20 bet, which was nice. Would have hit on a Patrick Cantlay top 10 bet, but he shot 4 over on Sunday, which was a little unexpected, to be honest, a little disappointing as well from that aspect. Doc Redman missed the cut. Lucas Glover made the cut, but didn't quite finish in the top 20 where we needed him to. But I'm looking forward to next week. Dustin Johnson's shot at redemption after an awful 16 over between the first 2 days of the tournament. I also saw him 4-putt, like I mentioned before, as well as Bryson DeChambeau with a 10 on a par 5 15th at Muirfield Village. So that was pretty interesting to see. Next week's field is not as loaded as this past week's field, but still exciting to see. Get to see what Dustin Johnson can do. He will obviously be the clear favorite going into next week's tournament. NASCAR, an amazing race in NASCAR. 2 restarts within the last 10 laps, so that was exciting. We ended up hitting the Tyler Reddick top 5 bet, which was the best value for us. Ryan Blaney and Eric Almirola were in the top 3 heading into the 300th lap. That could have been a different story had there not been a wreck immediately after following their pit stops, kind of pushed them back into the field. They ended up both finishing in the top 10, so it was nice to hit top 10 bets, as well as Kevin Harvick with the top 5 bet. So overall in NASCAR, 4 for 4 on the bets, which was a nice bounce back for Poojie Parlay. Second place for Tyler Reddick, 5th place for Kevin Harvick, 7th place for Ryan Blaney, and then Eric Almirola rounding out the top 10. So that was nice. So we'll see what happens next week in the field of NASCAR, or in the world of NASCAR. Excited to see what they do next week. But then also we had some EPL soccer this weekend. Southampton won on Sunday morning, 2-0. We also had Tottenham playing as well. So some good EPL action, and then F1 on Sunday morning. Have not bet on F1. Lewis Hamilton always seems to be the clear-cut favorite there, so I haven't found the value. But I do enjoy watching it alongside of EPL on Sunday morning. So definitely thank you for tuning into this episode. Be sure to tune in Wednesday for Back to Baseball. And until next time, thank you to Shores Pub Mandarin for sponsoring Poojie Parlay. But go enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks.
Be sure to follow our show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and other podcast streaming services, as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel to check out unique video elements for each interview.